There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Happy 40th birthday, Eric! I made you a tag! Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with a birthday tag for Eric Karl Anderson, who turns 40 today. Many happy returns. It's called the Eric Karl Anderson 40th birthday tag. So, it's not a big secret on my channel that Eric Karl Anderson is my favorite BookTube channel. I love his enthusiasm, his humor, his warmth, and his authenticity. I will admit that it took me some time to accept that he actually does love all the books that he says he loves. He loves a lot more kinds of novels than I do. And we're kind of like oil and vinegar in that way. But he actually does. And his enthusiasm is infectious. We don't agree all that often on books, but his enthusiasm is so infectious. And I love the ray of sunshine that he casts here on BookTube. And I have learned about so many new books. Stay tuned for the first prompt here. But Eric, happy birthday. So without further ado, let's get started. Number 1. Thanks a Bunch. A book or books you first heard about from Eric's channel or blog, or that you and he both love. So this is a mix of books that I've originally found out, and I actually don't remember so well for most of them, whether I first heard about them, but certainly books. We have a 64% compatibility according to Goodreads in terms of our books and our ratings, but here are some books that we definitely agree on. I think Eric can probably guess the number 1, the first book I'm going to show here, and maybe several of my subscribers can too. Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeleine Tien. This won a bunch of prizes and was nominated for even more in 2016, and it's my favorite novel of all time. I believe I have 3 signed copies kicking around here somewhere. I don't think it's probably Eric's favorite novel of all time, but we certainly share a love for this novel. And I don't need to tell anybody what it's about because you probably know. Next, and I don't even know if Eric knows how much I ended up loving this, but Red Clocks by Lenny Zumas. I just finished it maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. 5-star read, top read of the year, for sure. I loved this with all my heart. And Eric's blog entry and maybe one of his videos talks about how Zumas was inspired by Virginia Woolf's The Waves, and I could add all of Virginia Woolf's novels that I've read I would share in common with Eric. How much of an intertext, or how much it inspired Zumas or kind of bounces off that novel. So I would like to reread this maybe before the end of the year, and The Waves, which I read decades ago. An Unrestored Woman by Shobha Rao, a collection of intriguingly paired short stories about women during the partition of India, published last year during the 50th anniversary of that partition, and how that tragic, murderous boundary went right through the lives and the hearts of so many women. And last but certainly not least, The Portable Veblen by Elizabeth Mackenzie. This was one of my top reads of 2016. Also nominated for a bunch of prizes. I don't think it ended up winning anything. I can't remember now. It doesn't matter. It's a wonderful novel about a brainy, socially awkward young woman who gets engaged and with an absolutely crazy mother. Doesn't want to give up her friendship with squirrels. Talks to squirrels. The squirrels talk back at a certain point. And I love this novel with all my heart, especially because of its audio version. There's a couple of versions of the audiobook, but if my advice means anything at all, you must seek out the version narrated by Laurence Bouvard. I'll put her name in the show notes. It's wonderful. I can't wait. I've read one other of Mackenzie's earlier novels, which I really liked too, and I can't wait for her next one. But this is an absolutely wonderful novel. It filled me with joy. Number 2, Looking Forward, a book or books you want to read because of Eric's channel or blog. If you so desire, make a TBR. I said make a September TBR of them. Well, I certainly am going to make a TBR of them. I've realized since I made this tag since I made these tag questions, that I'm up to my nipples in buddy reads in September, so I don't know if I'll get to any of these books in September, but I want to get to most of them before the year is out, and these are all books that I heard about first from Eric's channel. The first is The Third Reel by S.J. Nudia, and I have spent a lot of time checking and got 2 confirmations on the South African Broadcasting Corporation website, interviews with him, and 1 on BBC. The pronunciation, for anybody who's interested, is Nudia, the Afrikaans pronunciation. And this novel sounds fascinating. It's a chunkster, but it sounds fascinating. It's about a young South African studying film in London. He fled the draft in South Africa. It's 1986, the time of all the anti-apartheid stuff, and also the time of postmodern, post-punk rock, blah, blah, blah. Falls in love with a German artist, and finds the first of 3 reels of a German film from the 1930s. Begins searching for the missing ones, ends up taking him to Germany. And there's definitely a gay theme to it as well. It sounds really different, really unique, and I think I might love it. I think it might be another Sean and Eric book. This fall sometime I'm going to be doing a buddy read of my very first Joyce Carol Oates novel, and I have chosen The Falls because it has a kind of a gay theme, and I have never read any Joyce Carol Oates, and she's Eric's goddess. I don't know whether I'll like her or not, but I'm going to try The Falls. Maybe October. I think the buddy read is tentatively scheduled. I also heard about this gay novel from Eric's channel a few months ago called London Triptych by Jonathan Kemp. And it's 3 stories about rent boys in London from, I think, the time of Oscar Wilde. There's 3 stories from Oscar Wilde's time to the present. So, sounds interesting. I have it available to me on Scribd, and actually a couple other of Kemp's novels. He was not familiar to me at all, but I found out about him from Eric. I'm just getting messages from people saying, I'm going to do the tag, coming through on Voxer, sorry, while I'm filming. Meaning this tag, Eric Karl Anderson birthday tag. And the last one that I'm definitely committed to trying, thanks to Eric, has a gorgeous cover. This is one of the ones, if you were watching my Women in Translation readathon vlog where I was having all the Amazon drama, this was one of the books. Crudo by Olivia Lang. And Eric, I think he's deemed this one of his top reads so far in 2018. I have not read her first book about, isn't it about walking in the city, the lonely city? That sounds interesting. This novel, I'm interested because even though I've never read any Kathy Acker, what I've heard about, what Eric has said about this book, and what I've heard about Kathy Acker recently makes me want to read this alongside one of Kathy Acker's novels. So I don't know if Eric has read any Kathy Acker, but maybe he or one of you will recommend which Kathy Acker book I should pair with this. Number 3, Table Turn, a book or books you recommend to Eric to read. Oh, goody, goody, goody. First off, Eric, I don't think you've heard of this, but I really recommend... Just kidding! I have 4 books, and I will recommend them very quickly. This one comes from Maine, Eric, so maybe you've read it, but there's no evidence of you having read it anywhere online. The 1 in a Million Boy by Monica Wood. Actually, I don't know if she still lives in Maine. She grew up in Maine. I don't know where she lives now. So anyway, she was born in Maine. This was one of my top reads of 2016, and it's about the friendship between a 104-year-old lady and the, how old is he? 11 years old? 11-year-old boy who does volunteer work in her yard for one of his Boy Scout badges. And that sounds like a Sean book. What I think Eric might love it too is that the boy dies at the end of the first chapter, strangely. And then his father, who was estranged from the wife, his ex-wife, and the boy was somewhere on the autism spectrum perhaps, and the father, who was a musician, could never connect with his kid, and then his kid dies suddenly. And so his father has a very complicated grief, and he fulfills the remaining several weeks of the boy's volunteer contract with Miss Ona Vitkus, and develops a relationship with her, which is just a joy to read about. I love reading books about old ladies, and this old lady is still with me, Miss Ona Vitkus, and it's heartrending. I don't like sentimental schlock, and this manages to avoid that completely and be a really, in the most literary sense of the word, a deeply heartwarming story. I absolutely loved it. It's also really good on audio. A Canadian novel that I think Eric is aware of, The Break by Katharina Vermette. This was also one of my top reads of, I can't remember, a couple of 2016 or 2017. Did it win? It was nominated for a bunch of awards. Gorgeous cover. Really gritty tale about 3 or 4 generations of women, Métis or mixed race Indigenous Canadian women in Winnipeg, Manitoba, dealing with sexism, racism, and sexual violence in their lives. It's really beautiful and important, and I think, Eric, you would love it. Another gorgeous novel, this one from Australia. This is The Paper House by Anna Spargo Ryan, and this was her debut. And I got this when it was almost impossible to get outside of Australia, and that's a story for another day. And I loved it in a 4-star way. And it's about a woman, young married woman, dealing with keeping body and soul together after a miscarriage. Certainly, it's not a perfect novel, but I thought the writing was beautiful, and there was a lot of memorable characters and emotions expressed so beautifully on the page. And I am a big fan of Anna Spargo Ryan's. Have her second novel on my shelf. Haven't got to it yet, but Eric, I think you would like this a lot. And my last recommendation, very quickly, is a novel called Nagasaki by Eric Fay, translated from the French by Emily Boyce. And this was published in 2014 in the English translation. And this is based on a true story about a man in Nagasaki who realizes after several months have passed that a homeless woman is living secretly in the house with him. And he had no idea. And it's 100 pages. Really, I was really skeptical. He's a journalist. It was his only novel. And it really works as a novel, and it made me think in a really deep way about solitude, loneliness, homelessness, and gave me, I'm going to use this. I never use this phrase, but I'm going to allow myself to use it for Eric's birthday tag video. It gave me all the feels. I think you would really like it, Eric. Number 4, Eric Karl Anderson, a book by an author with 3 names. This is also a recommendation for Eric, Cynthia Proper Seton. I read this with Ange of Beyond the Pages after discovering her through the Book of Forgotten Authors by Christopher Fowler, and I have a very passionate review of this on my channel. That's all I'm going to say, but Cynthia Proper Seton. You've never heard of her, I'd never heard of her, unless you've been hearing about her on my channel. She's not a author that anybody's ever heard of. But I want to change that. So this was wonderful. 5, Expatriate Love, a book by and or about an American living in the UK or vice versa. This one was actually harder than I thought, so please forgive me, all you people doing this tag, if you had trouble with this one. But this is my choice. Sympathy by Olivia Sujic. Came out in 2017. And this is about a mixed-race young British woman who goes to New York to live with her dying grandmother and gets enmeshed with a Japanese Instagram novelist. Gets obsessed. And so it's a novel of social media and obsession. It was unputdownable. It has one major flaw in that the protagonist's mixed race identity is completely glossed over, even though everything else about it was pitch perfect. But it really made me mad that I didn't even realize that her father, I believe, was black. Yeah, it's just, oh, you almost missed it, and that really bugged me. But otherwise, I thought it was such a fierce debut. I can't wait to see what Olivia Sujic does next. And I don't think I haven't heard anybody on BookTube talk about it except me in my debut video, which you shouldn't go and watch. The other thing I'll say about this is if you like the flaneur theme in literature, which I think is The Lonely City by Olivia Lang talks about that, there's wonderful descriptions of the protagonist walking in New York. Just unforgettable. Number 6, Meta. A book with a novelist slash writer as protagonist. I'm going to do these very quick. Another book that nobody seems to have read except me in the whole social media book world is A Paper Sun by Jason Buckles, which has a Murakami-esque slipstream feel to it, but is also very impressive as a literary novel about a Asian American guy who is a teacher and a writer who sees a Chinese family on a ship in his teacup. It's kind of an image. It's like a 3D image, and it freaks him out. So he goes home and he writes a short story about what he saw, and it gets published. And then the Chinese American woman knocks on his door the next day and says, "How dare you write a short story about my family? That was my uncle in your short story, the little boy on the ship. Our family's been looking for him for 70 years. What happened to him?" The story goes from there. So, that, again, kind of Murakami-esque slipstream, not completely realistic fiction. Not a Sean book, you wouldn't think. I loved it. And writer as protagonist, okay? Whew. Life After Life. She wasn't the protagonist, but the aunt, the protagonist's aunt, that was so unconventional, and she became a novelist. I didn't take the time to check what her name was, sorry. And another book that I absolutely loved, Mothering Sunday by Graham Swift and Jane Fairchild. We see her in the midst of a love affair while she was a housemaid in 1924 on Mother's Day, or Mothering Sunday, and then I don't think it's a spoiler to say that she ends up becoming a writer. Love this book. Need to reread it. That cover! Number 7, Lordy Lordy. A book by or about a 40-year-old and or a book published 40 years ago in 1978. This was also really difficult. When I made the prompt, I thought, oh, that'll be fun. It'll be fun. Difficult. So I've got 2 books published 40 years ago. The first one I haven't read. The second one I have, but it's so long ago I don't remember. The one I haven't read is from Australia, Tira Lira by the River by Jessica Anderson. And it was written years earlier, but not published until 1978. I've never heard of Jessica Anderson. I think I'd heard the title of this novel along the way, but it was maybe her 4th published novel, but she'd written it years before. It's about a young woman in a tightly knit small-town family. She tries to get away from that tight-knit, overbearing community by getting married, but that didn't go so well, and then she travels to London to try to become the woman she wants to be. Sounds interesting. And an Alice Munro collection of short stories, also published in 1978. In Canada, the title of the collection was Who Do You Think You Are? Outside of Canada, so US, UK, it was The Beggar Maid, nominated for the Booker in 1980. So some people say it's her novel, it's her one novel, because the stories are somewhat linked. Royal Beatings is one of her most anthologized story, and it was first published in this collection. And I read it 25 years or more ago, and remember really liking it, but that's all I remember. But Alice Munro is the goddess. Number 8, Handlebar Nun, a book by or about someone with a fabulous mustache and or beard. Well, Eric Karl Anderson's a published writer, but aside from him, there's also other choices. Walt Whitman. I didn't want to make this video about me, or else I would have read you the Walt Whitman poem I had my dear cousin read at my wedding. Maybe that'll be another video. Walt Whitman. Number 9, Out Out Brief Candle. A book in which a birthday figures prominently. I have chosen 2, one from my home province of Saskatchewan. I talked about this at length in my Saskatchewan literature video about a month ago. A novel called Who Has Seen the Wind by W.O. Mitchell. I don't remember the publication date, but maybe 1940s. And I remember the scene from the movie, the Chinese laundry or Chinese cafe in town. They were the only non-white people in the town, and this novel was set in the 1930s, I believe. And the little Chinese girl had a birthday, and she invited all of her classmates and her teacher, and nobody came except her teacher. And it was the first time I'd ever seen anything dramatized or represented about racism in my life, and it made such a deep impression. I can still get choked on that little girl sitting by herself with her mom and her teacher. Another one that's really important in my life history, literary history, is the play, but especially the film, The Boys in the Band by Mark Crowley. The play was off-Broadway in 1968, and the film was 1970, so it's way before my time. I came out in 1986, but that film speaks so deeply to me about gay sociality, the gay community, gay male interactions, that I've watched it so many times that I could just perform it for you here, but I won't do that. I'll give you just one of my favorite little snippets.
All right. Who do you have to fuck to get a drink around here? Would you like somewhere?
But the play/movie centers around a birthday party with one of the group of these gay male friends in New York in the 1960s. The presents he gets and all the enmity and competition and love that these men express over the course of a alcohol-infused evening together. It's probably my favorite piece of gay literature. Certainly my favorite gay film of all time. So, last but not least, many happy returns tag some book buddies. So I have already contacted behind the scenes several booktubers. I'm not going to name them here, but in addition to those, I am going to tag the following 7 people. Ollie Bliss, Dave at Wild Reads, a new-to-me booktuber that you must check out, Marie at MH Books, Lukash at Totally Pretentious, Lucy and Scott over at Book Axe, Ange of Beyond the Pages, and Dane of Dane Reads. So Eric, hope you have a great birthday, and thanks for watching.